Hi, welcome to another one of our webinars on leadership insights. Today's topic is surviving and thriving in a post-pandemic era. My name is Ed Marks. I'm your host. I serve as the Chief Digital Officer for Tech Mahindra Health and Life Sciences. And I'm excited to have Anthony Guerra with us today. And we'll go into some introductions and then jump right in. I do want to remind you, this is a live event. The reason we do it live is two reasons. The first and foremost is we want to engage with you. So if there's a topic that you would like us to touch on, feel free to enter in the questions of part of the GoToWebinar control panel, and we will try to get to as many questions as possible. So if there's something we don't touch on or something you want us to go deeper that we do touch on, everything's fair game. And the second reason, it's fun for us too, just to be live makes it more interesting for everyone. Anything can happen and often does. So it makes it a lot of fun. I want to introduce Anthony really briefly and then let him tell you a little bit more about himself. Anthony is a great friend of mine. I've admired his work since the time he was the senior editor or the general editor-in-chief of Healthcare Informatics. Loved reading his stuff, was a big fan then. And then when he started Health System CIO, always engaged with his activities. But he's just a great person, and I thought a great person to have on our leadership webinar insights, given the fact that he is interviewing people all the time, multiple times per week in a number of modalities, and he has so much wisdom and insight to share with us. So with that, Anthony, please introduce yourself and welcome.
Well, I appreciate that, Ed, and you are a good friend, and we have known each other a tremendously long time, and that's a nice thing. So I don't know if I'm going to add too much more to what's down there. My name's Anthony Guerra, the editor-in-chief and founder of Health System CIO. I've been doing this since 2010. I have two great colleagues and friends that work with me, Nancy Wilcox and Kate Gamble. And we just enjoy what we do and try and produce high quality stuff, obviously 100% focused on healthcare IT and the CIO, trying to serve them with information on sort of specifics, operational things, but very much on leadership. Always try and attend to that space, the leadership level. So that's what we do, and happy to be here.
All right, we're going to jump right in. Let's think pre-pandemic first. So Anthony, you've been doing this for a good 10 years. I mean, obviously with the magazine a lot longer than that, but 10 years of multiple interviews every week with different health system, different types of leaders. And what have you seen in terms of, and we're focused on leadership, obviously, what have you seen in changes over the last 10 years leading up to the pandemic? We want to kind of hold off on the sort of the post-pandemic, but up until that time, in the last 10 years, have you seen a shift? Have things, how have things evolved from your point of view?
Well, I think it's probably not too surprising. I think leadership is leadership, right? So I don't think that leadership has been redefined with the pandemic. Leadership has been brought out, if it's there or not, in the pandemic. This is the storm. There's an expression: anyone can be in charge of the ship when the seas are calm, but who can be in charge when there's a storm? Well, this is a storm, and there's a shakeout when you have storms, and you see who can step up and who wasn't able to step up. But the characteristics that made someone excellent before made them survive now. It's adaptability. It's the ability to change. I can hear it, in the voices when we interview people. When someone is outstanding, you can hear it in their tone. There's a level of excitement and enthusiasm. We've even heard things said such as, and it's not in a bad way, but they've said, I wouldn't have missed this for the world. Like, this is what I trained for. This is what I worked for all these years, to have all this wisdom and to be in this position for this challenge. And I'm glad I wasn't on the sideline. So nobody wants to see a pandemic. Nobody wants to see people die. But sometimes in life, it is exciting and exhilarating to have all your skills tested at their highest level. And the highest level, what that was defined by now was the ability to achieve and the ability to affect change, to get things done. That's always been what's important, but I think you could get away with it in the past. There were some CIOs that are turnaround agents. Those are the ones who need to affect change, right? Self-described. I want to go in when it's a mess. I want to fix it and then I want to leave. Okay, well, that pretty much defines what a successful person needs to be like. The person who says, I like taking over something that's very stable and making sure it stays that way, that's, probably a dime a dozen. And that's certainly not the kind of person that was going to be successful now. So I think the ability to affect change, to embrace the pace as things were sped up, and to handle that and be invigorated by that, I think that's what really defined people who were successful through this episode.
Yeah, so we always try to be really practical. So when you were talking about that, the adaptability, the pace, the agility, those sort of characteristics, let's talk about some who might have been caught a little bit flat-footed, so didn't have those characteristics, didn't have those capabilities, made it through, led through. What are the sort of skills that you've seen, you sort of best practice, and you described a couple of them, but what would you recommend for people who think to themselves when they do self-reflection, man, I did okay, we did okay, but I would want to do better. So what can I learn from those who kind of you were describing sort of led that way? What are some, so it's a two-part question. Some more of those characteristics, and two, how do I get those? How do I, go about trying to add that to my portfolio of capabilities?
Well, that's a tough one. Some of this is so intrinsic to who we are and what we'll accept. So I think it's number one, you have to figure out what should I be doing, right? What do I need to do? And you can do that by, I think, and we'll probably touch on this in other areas, ingesting as much information as possible about what other people are doing. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to be the smartest guy on the planet, but you have to be smart enough to read what the smartest guy on the planet's doing, right? It's all out there. It's on our site, it's on other sites. Healthcare executives are wonderful in terms of their willingness to share. Probably other industries, there's more competitive issues, but there's very little of that in healthcare. There's a lot of sharing. There's so much information out there, cutting information real time, like a week ago, a few days ago. Webinars are live. You're hearing exactly what they're saying right now. So I would say you need to ingest as much information as you can to help you figure out what the best and the most cutting edge people are doing, and then decide what you want to do. I think one of the most important things that can make a CIO successful today is sound IT governance, because that's the process of deciding what to do based on the available resources. And the best CIOs that I've spoken with know how important IT governance is to their success. They want the business to decide what IT is going to do based on the resources available. And it's got to be a two-way street. So there has to be education of the business. It can't just be passive on the IT side. And I've always found this an interesting dynamic, because we've always heard IT shouldn't lead, IT shouldn't lead, IT shouldn't lead, right? You can't own the project. You can't be the one that pushed the project. I get that, and that makes sense. But IT has to educate the business leaders, because you don't ever want a CEO going, why haven't I heard about this? Why didn't I know this could be done? I didn't know. You're supposed to tell me. So it's that balance of bringing ideas, educating, but then letting them own it and saying, now you decide, you tell me what you want done. And it's that prioritization. Without good IT governance, you're in a very dangerous position, because they'll always be able to question, well, why are you working on this? Why are you not working on that? And that's especially important when you've got somebody like an influential physician who wants to know why his pet project isn't being taken care of. You have to be able to explain, call it CYA, call it whatever you want, but you have to be able to explain why you're doing what you're doing. So I think to be effective, you have to figure out, you have to know what the options are, figure out what you want to do, and get it through a good IT governance process. but it's about affecting change. It's not about going in and leaving at the end of the day. It's about affecting change. And the best we've spoken to have almost an impatience, an unwillingness to put up with bureaucracy, and anything bristles at them. It bothers them. They would not accept it. And I could hear it in their voice. You can hear it in the way I can hear it when I think of what they're saying. Because the patient is what's on their mind. The best CIOs are thinking about the patient, and to an extent the end users, the physicians and the nurses, as they take care of the patient. That's where their mind is. Their mind is not in the budget. I mean, these are things you have to deal with, but their mind is not in the things that stand in the way. Their mind is at the end point, and they're not going to be stopped in achieving what needs to be done. It's a wonderful thing when you hear it.
Yeah, those are really powerful things. I would just encourage our audience and those who listen afterwards that you really need to challenge yourself and ask yourself those questions like, am I really doing that? And then to the point that you can have some confidants that'll tell you that speak truth in your life, ask them, hey, am I that change agent? Am I that catalyst? Is the customer number one in my mind, or is it technology? You know, all the things that you covered, Anthony, is people should really take a lot of time to self-reflect, because oftentimes we hear things like that. I know I'm guilty of this. I'm like, oh yeah, checkbox, 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 but maybe not. So those are really good. The final thing I would just add to what you were saying is there's a proverb out there, you know, so I don't know it off by heart, but something about, you know, you're going to be like the 3 to 5 people you hang out with the most. So when it comes to you, one of the practical things that you said were reaching out to your peers. So always have those 3 to 5 go-to peers that you really respect inside and outside of healthcare, and use them as a sounding board. And it'll be amazing how that impacts and helps you become a better leader, and it helps them as well. So those are really powerful examples. Let's talk about danger zones and blind spots. And you know, sometimes, almost like I was speaking about, we think we're checking all these boxes, but maybe we're not. So how have you seen the best sort of CIOs or leaders sort of handle that, you know, that the awareness of, oh, wait a second, I may have some blind spots. What can I do to enhance my leadership?
That's a great question. And I think that, you know, you mentioned having people you can talk to get feedback on your performance. It's also very important to have people in your organization who report to you or who work with you who you can run ideas by. I mean, I found that to be absolutely essential. I'm not willing to make big decisions without discussing them, the pros and cons and all that type of thing with the people I trust in our company. I need feedback. I need to hear it. Now, you have to get those key people to the point that they will tell you when you're wrong. Now, I'm not saying they're going to refuse to do what you finally decide, but you have to get them to the point where they're comfortable telling, Ed, you're wrong. Ed, I don't agree with this decision. Or Ed, here's what you missed here. Here's what you missed there. And a lot of people are not comfortable having those conversations with their bosses or superiors. So you have to build that trust of, hey, look, you see, when you told me, nothing bad happened. I'm not mad. You know, I'm actually happy because it's always safer for them to either agree or to not push back. But that doesn't get you anywhere. So I think that's an important process to cultivate that relationship. So people will tell you when you're missing the mark, when you have a blind spot, when something's going down the wrong path. And you really have to thank them when they do, because they've done you a tremendous favor. You're either going to get that from your customers or from your employees. And it's invaluable in either case. You need to hear these things to try and improve, or you don't know.
Yeah, that was an important early lesson for me too. When I was a young officer, I wanted everyone in my platoon, you know, to like me. And I remember the company commander pulling me aside, and he was like, Lieutenant Marks, if everyone likes you, you're probably not doing your job. You know, you've got to get their feedback. If they're not telling you something, then it's just the wrong team dynamic. So let's talk about leadership in teams. So through this pandemic and post-pandemic era now, so we all learned a lot. Perhaps that learning got accelerated, or as you stated, gave us opportunity to exercise what was already within us, and now we're operating at this new level. What about, what are you seeing sort of the best practice from leaders? Like, what are they doing with their teams?
Well, there's a lot going on. Obviously, most people are remote now. There's a tremendous amount of remote working going on. And we know that a lot of people, some employees want that to be permanent. Some want to come back, depending on home situations and the environment you have to work in. Some want a hybrid. And I think that I think has to be navigated by leadership. I've always been a tremendous believer in allowing your people to work when they want, where they want, to as much a degree as you can, and what time they want. So, and to integrate work into their life in a way that works best for them. And that may be different for different people based on who's got children, who doesn't have children, commutes, this and that. And again, environment at home. Is there an office? Is there a place to work? Is it not a comfortable environment to work at home? You could have people on exactly the opposite sides of the fence. So I think that's very important. This is about team care, caring for your team. Any good leader is going to have that as a major component of what they're focused on. There's the work that gets done by the team, and we talked about that a little bit, but then there's the team. So if you can empower the team to work in the environment they're most comfortable, and you also have to make sure that they are doing self-care, that they are getting the time off that they need. You have to decide for yourself as the leader what level of sort of self-care you need. But you also have to make sure that they're doing what they need. You can't just rely on them to do it. You have to be observant, and you have to try and pick up signs, and you have to make sure you almost insist on that without making it seem punitive. So you don't want to say, listen, you need to go take a week off and come back when you're calm or when you're ready. No, because that sounds negative. But it has to be, hey, I think you've been working so hard. Why don't you, take a couple of days, or think about taking a couple of days? I think that's extremely important, because if people start to break down, the whole thing's going to break down. And I think in this environment, we've heard about Zoom fatigue, too many video calls when they could be audio. Video calls take a lot more mental energy. There's been articles out about that than audio calls. Different things like that. You just have to make sure your team is taking care of themselves, doing well with their families, and then they'll be able to give you their best when they are working.
Yeah, those are very good, and a lot of that too is reflective of the leader themselves. So we have to be very careful. I know this is one of my growth areas as well, where we might say one thing, but then we're texting our team at 8 or 9 p.m. for things that maybe aren't like critical here and now. We're sending a bunch of messages over the weekend. Again, that may not be critical. Obviously, times there's critical things and exceptions, but if you do, your actions, right, speak louder than words. So you have to align yourself as a leader, that your actions, that you withhold doing that. Otherwise, the perception is that, oh, I should be responding right away, and then you lose that whole balance and things like that. So that are so important to team care. So that's really good. So we have 10 minutes left, and again, this is live, and we encourage your interaction. If there's questions that you have, we will definitely address them. If there's something that we said that has spawned another question, please write those in, and we'll try to get to all of the questions as they come up. So is there an example, and we're not going to name names, but Anthony, I'm curious. So we did talk already about, sort of that leadership. What were those characteristics that really differentiated, the really successful leaders during this time from the not so successful? Were there any sort of surprise, like quick metamorphosis of individuals that you may have been aware of that happened, and how do you maintain that? So, two questions, a slightly different spin, but were there some surprises in a good sense? And then how do you, and we talked about the characteristics that's needed, how do you sustain those sort of characteristics? In terms of change management, the pace and all that kind of stuff?
So I don't think I've observed anyone at the level that I could say somebody sort of came out of their shell. But I can give you a couple of examples of small things that just really impressed me, or I'll even name a couple of names. And I don't mean to, I'm not going to leave any, don't think I left somebody out, because I'm just going to name a few that come to mind. So I would say Aaron Meary, CIO down in Texas. He's been on some stuff with us. Inspiring. I mean, if you hear him, you have to hear him. You could read, read something, but if you hear him, he's inspiring in terms of his energy and excitement and passion. Joel Venko in Massachusetts, at Bay State, has that same kind of energy. And another one of my favorites is Chuck Christian, who's sort of, everybody knows Chuck, and Chuck is inspiring it's sort of a calmer, extremely dignified. Chuck is just fascinating, and I remember we taught one of the last webinars we had with him. He used a few examples of things he wouldn't put up with. I think he said, if I hear from anyone that it's not my job, and that's all he has to say, because that's it. You're right. Chuck, he'll just look at you and he'll tell you that. He doesn't have to yell. This is a man that never has to yell, never has to get excited or raise his voice. But he hears something like that, he's just going to look at you, and you're going to know that you really messed up. I think one of the other things he said was someone told him to put in a ticket, right?
Right.
And I mean, so that's Chuck, and I love that kind of gravitas, I think is the word. Just not someone I'd mess with. And the other two, just the absolute unwillingness to put up with anything that gets in the way of the results they're looking to achieve.
Yeah.
So I think that's the best way I'd put that.
Yeah, and those are three great leaders. And there's another practical tip. They'll probably, well, I wouldn't say they won't be mad about it, but they wouldn't be. But contact them. So if there's something that Anthony just shared about those particular individuals, they're all three of them very kind people, very sharing oriented. And again, just call. Sometimes leadership is humility. And I think sometimes us as leaders, we feel like, well, I'm the CIO of such and such, and there's no way I can call someone else because, what would that mean about my leadership? Well, what it means is that you're a really strong leader. So go out and call these people and find out what they're doing and how they're leading. So the second part of that question is really, is all this sustainable? So a lot of rapid growth of individual leaders, a lot of rapid development, right, in digital and those sort of things. How do you sustain that focus and that energy?
So you don't sustain it, right? So what happened is we went from, let's say the steady pace of the industry was 40 miles an hour, okay? And that's the pace at which everything was developed. All the systems were developed to operate in terms of governance, review, implementations, things like that. So we went to 100 miles an hour from 40 miles an hour. And what the trade-off there was that a lot of things had to go by the wayside. Things did not go through the full governance process. Security was not fully vetted on everything that was put out. So a lot of people we've talked to have talked about going back and remediating the things that were put in. Some getting rid of some of them, rationalizing, getting rid of things, reviewing things, optimizing, and bringing things up to the level of security that they need to be at. So there's a go back and review point. Now, I don't think the goal is not to go back to 40 miles an hour, because what people saw was, I can operate at 100 miles an hour. I didn't know that. It's almost like that's been revealed. So you're not going to go back to 40. Nobody wants to go back to 40, but you can't operate at 100 because there's too much risk. Your risk level elevated too high operating that fast. So I think it's somewhere in the middle. We're going to come back to the best places are going to come down somewhere in the middle. They're going to fix or remediate everything that was implemented in a hurry. They're going to come back to the middle. If you try and keep going at 100, your team's going to break down, or you're going to be taking on too much risk, which is going to catch up with you in a bad way. If you go back to 40, That's not acceptable. No one is going to find that acceptable because it's been revealed what you can accomplish. Why would I have to wait 6 months for this project when you rolled out telehealth in 2 weeks and you
Right.
had 6,000 people working from home in 3 days? I know what you can do, so you're not going to be able to pull that anymore. So somewhere in the middle.
So a question from the audience, and we've touched around this, but this more precisely. Can you cite an example of the best leadership style or qualities, globally? Because I know that Anthony, you have a global reach during this pandemic. So is there a particular style or qualities that you have seen sort of as the top tier?
Well, I mean, I'm going to go general. Forget about going global. I'm going to talk about beyond healthcare. So I'm a big reader, and I've always been a student of leadership. Um, and I think leadership is becoming more of a science and a little less of a mystery and an art. So the more you read about it, the more you understand that things like decision making. I mean, there's a formula, right? It's not gut feeling, and I look off. I got to go sit in the woods, which is part of it, though. Reflection is certainly part of good decision making, but it's not mystical. There's a process that gets you to make good decisions that you can emulate. I would recommend, just for reading, and this is the first one may surprise people a little bit, but the other two won't. So again, I've read quite a bit of stuff. I don't like to read things about leadership per se, books that are written about leadership by people. I prefer to read about leaders, biographies, autobiographies, things like that. And I would say in my top three in the pantheon of leadership would probably be, and this one might surprise you, Ulysses S. Grant. Then you've got a couple of your favorites who are Lincoln and Churchill. This is just good stuff. It's there. So, and it's a pleasure sometimes to get out of, what you're in. You can read, your fellow CIOs, but reading some of this stuff, I mean, Grant is one of the best. There's plenty of stuff you can read about him. So if you want to look at characteristics that are exemplified in some of these three, again, it's an impatience, it's a focus on results, and something I'll call creative persistence. I don't know if I coined that or if it's out there, but creative persistence to me is when you have an objective that you're trying to achieve, and you refuse to stop. And that's an extremely important point of leadership. To succeed in some of these things, it's very, very difficult, depending on what the objective is. Extremely difficult. And creative persistence means I don't stop, but I don't keep trying the same thing. I'm going to keep trying everything I can think of. I don't care how many times I fail, but I'm going to keep coming. I'm going to keep going. And I'm going to keep, and I don't ever have to think about quitting, because that'll happen naturally. If I die, if
Right.
it's over, if I get fired, then it's taken care of for me. I never have to make a conscious decision to quit. And that's one of the characteristics that I've seen in almost all of the great leaders that I've studied. Creative persistence, they never stop. So you take that down to a much lower level on a business front. Just don't stop. If you've got something that you want to achieve for the business that you believe in, don't stop.
Yeah.
And you'll never fail if you don't stop.
Yeah, those are good insights, and I appreciate, Anthony, the books that you cited. Yeah, you can always learn from other models of leaders from around the world, and I do really push on the whole diversity as well of leaders from other industries, of other cultures around the world, we said industries, because you can really learn a whole lot from other people's experiences. So Anthony, time has like magically disappeared. So thankful. I wrote down a ton of notes myself, have some new insights. I appreciate you. Thank you again. In our last 30 seconds, I wanted to let you know about some upcoming webinars that we have. Our Leadership Insight series continues, as well as others. So we'll be talking about the psychology of leadership and 3 categories of motivation. It'll be very interesting. It goes back to the science that Anthony described. We have a series going on this year on race relations, and we'll be talking with Dr. Fatui, and that'll be a fabulous talk as well. And then we're going to take some lessons from around the world, speaking of which, and we're going to focus on the Middle East this fall. and learn what's going on in the Middle East. So with that, again, thank you for joining us today, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.